Okay, my explanation of the quiz review. Okay, I want you to remember that this is a review, so you've already done all of it. Some of you got here and seem to have forgotten everything we did before. Now, when that happens, you're supposed to go back and look at your other assignments and the notes and see what we did. Now, some of you I know are doing that, and some of you are just plowing ahead and praying that, I don't know, the gods align and stars align and everything's right. Okay, the quiz will get posted tomorrow. Remember that the quiz is going to be exactly like this. Same setup, same number of problems. I also want you to remember that when you're taking this quiz, you have full use of all the answers for the review and all of the answers in the work on all of the homework assignments. Make use of them to help yourself on doing these. Also, you can ask me questions in the middle of taking this test. Now, this is going to be your last grade for this semester, for this year, for this 9 weeks. So you will have Friday, the quiz will get posted. You have a long weekend, Monday's Memorial Day, and then you have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to get it finished and make any corrections to it that you want to get done. Okay? All right, so now let's go over this explanation. Now, the first thing about this is the only reason that we learned about fractional exponents is so that you learned how they related to radicals and rewriting them. So on these problems, I want you to rewrite it and then show me how you evaluate it. There really shouldn't be any calculator use on this. You should be able to use your perfect squares paper. Okay, so we've got the square root of 36 cubed. Remember, figure out the square root of 36 first is 6, and then cube it. So when you go to your x cubed column, go down to the 6, over to x cubed, you get 216. Lo and behold, that's our answer. Okay, 64 to the negative 2/3. Rewrite it. The third root of 64 to the negative 2. Go to your x cubed column. We see 64, and it equals 4. So we end up with 4 to the negative 2. Now you need to remember what to do with a negative exponent. It means you take the base, the 4, and you flip it into 1/4. That automatically makes the exponent positive. So now I have 1 over 4 squared, which is the same as 1 over 16. Okay, number 3 and 4. The only difference between 3 and 4 is this is a test of do you know what to do with that negative sign? Because remember, negative outside parentheses is vastly different than inside parentheses. Okay, so here it's outside. It needs to stay outside. So I wrote it outside, and then I rewrote 625 to the 3/4 as the fourth root of 625. All right, so I go to my fourth root, find 625. Going to equal 5. So my negative stayed outside the parentheses. I've got 5 to the third. PEMDAS says do the exponent before you multiply. So 5 to the third is 125. Multiply by the negative, you get negative 125. Here the negative is inside. So when I rewrite it, it's still going to be inside. Okay? Now, I had to do the fifth root of negative 32. Now remember, because this root is odd, I can find the root of a negative number. It's only when this index is even that I can't find the root of a negative number. Okay, so I go to my x to the 5th column. I find 32. It's going to equal 2. The negative goes with it. Now notice the negative is still inside parentheses because I'm taking it with whatever was in here. Okay, so now negative 2 squared is the same as negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. Okay, 5 through 8. What you're going to do is you're solving the equations. Anytime you solve an equation, what you're doing is you're doing SADMAP. And then you have to see if you can simplify the radical. Okay, so we have x to the 4th equals 20. The only thing you have to get rid of is the 4th. That means you take the 4th root of both sides. So we get x. And remember, when this is even, you're going to end up with two answers, a positive and a negative. Now the only thing left to do is see, can I simplify the fourth root of 20? So you have to go to your x to the fourth column. We do not see 20 on here. We do not see a factor of 20 on here. So that's it. That's as far as it goes. You have to make sure you have that plus and minus. If you do not, then you are missing an answer. Okay, number 6, x to the fifth equals negative 10. Fifth root of both sides. Remember, you can take the fifth root of a negative number. We just have to find out on our x to the fifth. Is 10 on here? Nope. And no factor of 10. So it stays just like that. Okay, number 7. SADMEP. We're going to subtract the 5 first. So 26 minus 5 is 21. Get rid of the 6 by taking the sixth root of both sides. Remember, 6 is a positive number. An even number, so it's got to have the plus or minus here. The only thing to do is go to our x to the sixth column. We don't see 21. We don't see a factor of 21. So it's done. Okay, number 8. SADMEP. Remember, parentheses come last. So you got to get rid of what's outside the parentheses first. So you take the cubed root of both sides. So now I have the cubed root of negative 16. 3 is an odd number, so I can take the third root of a negative. Okay? Now I have to get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, leaving me with just x here. The negative 3 goes in front of what I already had there. So it looks like this. Now, I have to make sure that my negative 16 is simplified. When I go to the cubed root column, I don't see 16, but I do have a factor of 16. So I break it down into negative 8 times positive 2. The 1 that's on the list, keep the negative with that one. Okay? So now I bring the negative 3 down. The third root of negative 8 turns into negative 2, and I keep the third root of 2. All right, the rest of the problems are things that we did on assignments 14 through 17, where you're simplifying the radical. You're going to be using both exponent rules and the switching of the radical rules. Okay, so this one, it has multiplication. Okay, they're both the fourth root. So the first thing you're going to do is go to your fourth root. We don't see 32 or 8 on here. So we're going to actually multiply them together. So 32 times 8 is 256. Now I go back to my x to the fourth. I see 256. So the answer is 4. And remember, on these, when you're simplifying, you don't worry about plus or minus. You only use the positives. Okay, now remember, there are several different ways to do this. So you have to show me your steps. Okay? All right, here we have the same radicands, but we don't have the same index. Before you can multiply radicals, it says you have to have the same index. So what I did is I moved to the next thing, where I have the outside exponent. The outside exponent means to distribute it to both of the things in there. So I end up with the square root of 10 to the 8th and the third root of 10 to the 8th. Now, the next thing I did is then I rewrote them as fractions. Now what I see is I see the rule for if you have two bases that are the same and you're multiplying them, you keep the base and you add the exponents. Now, before I can add 8 over 2 and 8 over 3, they have to have a common denominator. So I turned it into 6. So it became 24/6 plus 16/6 is 46. Now, I did what I did. Now, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to do like what you did when you were simplifying whole things on that last assignment, assignment 17. So take the 40 over 6 and divide it. You get 6 2/3. So I know I'm going to have a 10 with the 6th, and then I'm going to have a 10 with the 2/3. So the 10 with the 2/3 gets rewritten as the third root of 10 squared. And then 10 to the 6th is just 1 with 6 zeros. So that's your answer. Okay, this next one looks stupid scary because of all the stupid numbers. Okay? But what we're going to do first is we see exponents. That's all we see here. We're not going to worry about whether they're fractions or whether they're whole numbers. We're going to look at the exponent rules. So you have an outside exponent, you have exponents inside. You're going to distribute them. When you distribute them, you multiply them. So x to the 6th times 1/8 becomes x to the 6/8. Y to the 4th times 1/8 becomes y to the 4/8. Leave the 2 outside, because notice the only thing being squared here is what's in the parentheses. So the 2 comes over with it. So x to the 1/3 times 2 is x to the 2/3. Y to the 1/4 times 2 is y to the 2/4. Now, I'm going to simplify all of these fractions, okay? Because if I can do anything else, they all have to have the same bottom number. All right, so 6/8 becomes 2/3. 4/8 is 1/2. Keep the 2, the x, and the 2/3. Y to the 2/4 is y to the 1/2. Okay, so now I see that these are the same, and I'm adding. So I'm going to turn these into radicals. Before I can turn them into radicals, they have to have the same denominator. So both are 3 and 2, 3 and 2. We're going to turn them into sixths. So my 2/3 becomes 4/6. My 1/2 becomes 3/6. 2/3 becomes 4/6. 1/2 becomes 3/6. So now I can rewrite this as a radical, as the 6th root of x to the 4th y cubed. And I can rewrite this as a radical, the 6th root of x 4th y cubed. Notice my radicals are the same. I'm adding, so I just add the coefficients in front and keep that radical. Okay, number 12. Remember, we're going to start where most of the stuff is. Okay, most of the stuff is on top. What we see is 2 radicals are identical, and we're adding. So we can add the coefficients in front. 3 plus 4 is 7. Keep the radical. Now you've got it over radical, the square root of 7 to the 5th. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these into rational exponents. Okay, now there's other ways you can do it, but this is the way that I think best. So however you do it, you need to show me what you're doing. Okay, so I kept the 7, changed this into 3/2, changed this into 5/2. So now I've got 2 bases that are the same. That means you keep the base, add the exponents. So 1 plus 3/2 is the same as 2/2 plus 3/2, which is 5/2. So now I've got 7 to the 5/2 over 7 to the 5/2. Whenever you have the same thing over top of each other, it's just 1. Okay, number 13 definitely gets into like what we were doing with assignment 17. Okay, so I'm going to start where I have the most stuff, which is on top. So I've got a square root of x and a square root of x cubed. I can multiply these because they have the same radical. So x times x to the 3rd is x to the 4th. Bring the 2 along. We're just going to concentrate on the top right now. Okay. So now I'm going to turn this into a radical. I could keep it as x squared. Okay? X squared or x4 over 2. Whichever one you want. On the bottom, I separate them. Now, my square root of 64 is 8. My x becomes x to the 15 over 2. So I'm going to separate my 2 over 8 becomes 1/4. Here I've got the same base being divided, so I keep the base, subtract the exponents. So 4 minus 15 is negative 11 over 2. My 1/4 is done. It's just going to keep going along for the ride. I'm going to work with the x. So negative 11 divided by 2 is negative 5.5. To make it positive, I have to flip the base. So x becomes 1 over x to the 5 1/2. Now, remember, you get an x to the 5th and you get an x to the 1/2. X to the 1/2 is the same as square root of x. Okay? So far you're good. The only problem is you can't keep a radical down here. So we have to turn this x, we have to turn the power of this x into a multiple of 2 because the index is 2. So I'm going to multiply square root of x times square root of x. That'll give me square root of x squared. So the radical cancels out, leaves me with just x. So notice I've got my 4, x to the 5th, and then this became x. Now x to the 5th times x is x to the 6th. Notice when I multiplied square root of x down here, I had to multiply it up here, so my top became square root of x. Okay, look at it as, when you have a problem like this, start here and go, okay, what can I do? Do that one thing. And then reevaluate, is there something else I can do? Well, I see x's over top of each other, so I know an exponent rule is going to fall in there at some point. Okay? So if an exponent rule is going to fall in there, it means I'm going to have the fractions to subtract. And then at each stage, just keep reevaluating what you have. Forget about like what you had before and go, it's a whole new problem, and it's just a simple one-step problem. Okay, number 14. Number 14 definitely looks scary. Okay, what you need to keep in mind is this is a minus sign. So before you can do anything, the radicals have to be identical. Okay? So we have to see what we can do with each of these. We see an x to the 6th in both, so that's good. I see a 2 here and a 64 here. That tells me the 64 can get broken down into 2 times something. My y to the 10th here, no y to the 10th there. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is break this up. So my y squared's out front, and that's just going to ride along because that one's already done. So now I got the 5th root of 64, and I've got my 5th root of x to the 6th. Okay, 5th root of 64. Now, we know the 64 has to break down into 2. So 64 divided by 2 is 32. And we like that because on our x to the 5th, we see 32 right here. So it means it's going to become 2. Okay, so the 5th root of 32 is 2. Keep this. These are done. Okay, the 5th root of x to the 6th. The 6, the power, is bigger than the index. So we have to simplify that. So you turn it into the fraction, divide them, so you get an x to the 1st power and a 5th root of x. So now I have to combine all this. So I've got 2x y squared square root of 2 times x. Okay, leave that. Go over to the other side. Okay, the 6 that's out here is just going to ride along. So now I have the 5th root of 2, the 5th root of x to the 6th, the 5th root of y to the 10th. So I know the 6 is going to stay here. I know this is going to stay here. I already simplified this over here, so I know that's going to become x times the 5th root of x. So all I really need to do is look at this one. Okay? 10 is bigger than 5, so you're going to do 10 divided by 5 is 2. Now you got a y squared. Put this together. 6x y squared, right here. 5th root of 2x, right here. Now remember, before you can do anything with those coefficients, all these letters have to be identical. My x's have to have the same powers, my y's have to have the same powers, my radicals have to be identical. So now that they are, I can just do 2 minus 6, get negative 4, copy down all that letter garbage. Okay, so look for things like this that you've already done so you don't have to repeat the work. Okay, let me know if you have any questions because this is very much what your quiz is going to be like, okay?